after his trip to Ukraine. In an exclusive interview, the chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence in the House of Representatives, Ohio Republican Mike Turner. Chairman Turner, good to see you. What do you make of McCarthy and that bipartisan group meeting with Taiwan's president amid this difficult time between the United States and China?
Well, Jake, after China complained that Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, they're reminding everybody that they're an authoritarian regime by now complaining about Speaker McCarthy meeting with the president of Taiwan here in the United States. One thing they obviously don't understand about freedom is the freedom to meet with whoever you want. Taiwan is a democracy. It certainly is important for Speaker McCarthy to meet with them, recognizing our support for their democracy. This certainly is a way overstep by China. They emailed members of Congress with very threatening language. And I think, again, they're just reminding everybody this is an authoritarian regime. They're in opposition to democracies, and we certainly support democracies around the world.
How much is the fear of China invading and seizing Taiwan and depriving those 24 million people of the freedoms and democracy that they currently enjoy? How much is that part of the calculation as to why the United States is so strongly supporting Ukraine with the Russian invasion?
It's absolutely part of it. As you just outlined, Jake, the fact that we have provided weapons and that the Ukrainians have fought and have rebuffed the initial Russian invasion certainly shows to China that this is not a walk in the park for them if they should choose to invade Taiwan, and that Taiwan does have the support of the United States. But even more so, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was world outcry. There was world rejection and consternation for what Russia did. China knows that that would occur to them also. And the longer that we can let them know that there's a severe cost for invading Taiwan, the longer Taiwan gets to remain a democracy.
The D.C. think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, suggests that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would fail, but it would impose a huge cost on the U.S., the Chinese, and the Taiwanese militaries. The U.S. has already spent more than $30 billion on Ukraine over the last year. Does the U.S. have the resources to also support Taiwan defending itself?
Well, I think one of the things that's important here that is a lesson that's learned from Ukraine, and certainly Taiwan is stepping up to, that it's important for them to have weapons now. And the United States is certainly working to ensure that Taiwan has the resources that they need, because any fight over Taiwan, if they're invaded by China, in the end is going to come up to the issue of the Taiwanese people, like the Ukrainians, being able to stand and defend their own democracy. That's something that certainly is a priority. It's going to be part of the debate this year in Congress as to how we can get them the resources to make certain that they have the ability also to defend themselves.
You met earlier today with leaders from the United Nations nuclear watchdog. What are their foremost concerns right now? What are your foremost concerns when it comes to nuclear weapons?
Sure. Well, the Director General from the International Atomic Energy Agency, General Grossi, he took the unusual step when Russia invaded Ukraine of looking for his agency under the United Nations of having an ability to go into the nuclear power plants that Russia has put at risk, that they were shooting missiles at, that they now occupy, to try to ensure that there's not a human catastrophe there, that we don't have a meltdown and a real tragedy. So it was interesting to get an update from him on the status of those power plants, that he believes that at this time they're certainly stable. But we, of course, discussed North Korea and Iran, who continue to be both threats to the United States and destabilizing in their areas, and their nuclear weapons programs, and how they remain a threat.
Today, Russian President Putin told the new U.S. ambassador to Moscow that D.C. is ultimately responsible for Putin's invasion of Ukraine, adding that relations with the U.S. and Russia are in, quote, deep crisis. You just met with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. How does Zelensky view this increasingly volatile U.S.-Russia relationship?
Well, President Zelensky knows that he's the front line of democracy. And I met with both our military and, of course, advisors to Zelensky. The planning is in place. The logistics are in place to provide them the weapon systems that they need. He is certainly emboldened by what they're certainly being able to accomplish now. They're holding back Russia. They're looking in the spring to be able to even regain greater territory. But you know, as I was able to tell him, he's been inspirational to the world. He's addressed more legislative bodies around the world than any other human being in history. And he's certainly done the call to the world of we need to stand up for democracy and hold back authoritarianism. When President Xi met with President Putin, you know, he said, we're going to make change that hasn't happened in 100 years. They mean the fight between authoritarianism and democracy. And it was very good to see him and to hear from him, you know, his continued optimism of their ability to fend off and push Russia out of Ukraine.